Hello everyone, I'm Amanda Norman, Nurse Educator for Practice Development, and today I'm going to be presenting on Flourishing, Learning and Memory in Nursing. This presentation will be exploring the concepts of learning and memory and how our nurses can flourish in their lifelong learning and professional development. Understanding the principles of learning and memory helps nurse educators design effective, evidence-based education that supports lifelong learning, knowledge, and skill development. Learning is the process by which changes in behaviour arise as a result of experiences interacting with the world. Another important part of the process in learning is neurogenesis, which keeps the brain fit for learning. Neurogenesis is where the new neurons are generated by the hippocampus. This plays a critical role in learning and memory. New neurons are continuously generated in the hippocampus. Their survival is not guaranteed. Most die unless stimulated by meaningful learning experiences. Meaningful and effortless learning preserves neurons. Learning tasks that require focused attention and sustained effort. In nursing education, we can help preserve neurons in the brain using high-fidelity simulations and reflective debriefing to consolidate learning. Passive or easy learning doesn't have the same effect. Passive learning leads to neuron loss. As such, as stage on the stage, talking at the learners instead of engaging them. Timing matters with neurons when they're most likely to survive. If they're most likely to survive, learning occurs when they're about 1 week old. This suggests there's a critical window in which learning can be influenced by neural survival. Therefore, we can help scaffold learning, which will help neuron survival. For nurses, learning is a continuous cycle, and it involves cognitive knowledge and emotional engagement for application to the clinical environment to support and engage learning. Memory. So the basics of memory consolidation is where memory is stored and functions in two major ways. One is encoding, while the other is transfer of information. There are two forms of encoding, which is short-term and long-term memory. The transfer of memory from short-term to long-term memory requires two basic things and organization of information. 3 stages helps form memories. These stages are encoding, which is how sensory inputs come in and are transformed into inputs in the brain and stored in various forms of memory. And then storage, and this is how to retain the encoded sensory information. And then the retrieval, which is where you access the actual memory that's stored in your brain. It's also to know that learning and memory formation produced physical changes in our brain, which is called neuroplasticity. And what happens here is where sensory inputs and social experiences change our brain and at a cellular level. So as nurse educators, we are, in a word, neuroplasticians, how we shape the brain through our teaching and facilitating in the clinical environment. Memory retrieval is really essential for safe clinical decision making and delivering high quality care in a demanding healthcare environment. When we think about how memory works, we can break it down into 3 different processes. So we've got our sensory memory, where we take in information from our environment, such as our sight, our hearing, our touch, and our smell. And this is only stored for a really short period of time, so about 0.5 of a second to 4 seconds. And we can get those sensory memories back very quickly by the sight, touch, or smell or taste of something. And we also then have our short-term memory, where you're conscious of what you're thinking about at any given moment. So it's only small amounts of information that's processed in the working memory, so your short-term memory at any one time. This information is stored for about 5 to 20 seconds unless we actively try and remember the information by repeating it. So that's where, as nurse educators, repetition, so using a skill or asking people to say things out loud, like our basic life support DRS ABCD algorithm, can help. Our long-term memory, where we hold all our information. So the goal of learning is to move information where we can use it to later in our long-term memory. For memories to be moved into our long-term memories, they must be retrieved regularly. So when we teach basic life support, for example, if we just teach it once annually and we don't revisit it, people are more likely to forget. But if we consistently talk about and do simulations with our basic life support, so the DRS ABCD algorithm, people are more likely to be able to reenact and retrieve, and then they're able to use that into practice when they need to. So repetition is really key for long-term memory storage. And I think in nursing education, us building that simulation on a regular basis helps us then provide a clinical context, particularly for that high fidelity or high risk life-saving treatment, which is low frequency, which we don't see all the time. For learning to be achieved, we also then need to have three processes to occur. So attention, so starting and getting our learners to pay attention and focus. So then encoding, so our learners need to connect new information to what they already know. And then retrieval, so taking information out of long-term memory into our conscious working memory. So the more you retrieve something from our long-term memory, which I was talking about with the basic life support, it becomes easier for people who've been tested to apply it when they get into the real life situation. So our brain then receives stimulus, which has environmental factors, and then that is sent to us sensory receptors and then into our nerves. And that's just held long enough for it to be perceived and used into our working memory, or it gets discarded. So sensory information lasts, as I said, less than 1 second, and then it can be gone. So sensory is an experience which can use any of those 5 senses, like our taste, smell, hearing, but it can be retained, as I said, or discarded, or becomes part of our working memory. So we've all had those patients where we've had bleeding or melena, and you can recall and smell what that then smells like. As soon as you smell it again, you recognize what that is. And that's where your brain automatically controls what's happening. So our working memory is part of our consciousness where we're actively aware of it, and it helps us store immediately experiences like I was just talking about, and retrieving relevant knowledge. So then we would know how to look after a patient with melena and combine that to both problem solving and decision making. So sometimes memory is limited, and it typically holds about 4 pieces of information at once. So a working memory has limitations in its capacity, duration, and focus. And information fades unless we're actively processing it without distractions. And then we can use repetition and scaffolding to improve our learning. So our short-term memory is part of our working memory, and it seems to be sometimes seen as our interchangeable. So short-term memory and working memory is interchangeable, is what I was trying to say there. This type of memory is how we recall something newly received, and the information that we currently hold in our mind. So in our working memory, information is awfully, as I said, a really short term and usually only lasts for about 15 seconds. So like when we're taking, for instance, we can use our working memory when we're doing medication calculations. So we might carry over a number when we're subtracting or dividing, but only hold that for a few seconds to accomplish it. So information held in our working memory can also be transferred to our long-term memory when we pay direct attention and repetition like I was talking about. And then we can consciously try and retain that information. So then working memory can then become our long-term memory, which then we're consolidating. And we're doing that by rehearsing and having meaningful association. Our long-term memories are retained in our brain for longer periods of time, and some people say that they're permanently retained. They exist as part of our networks of neurons, so our neural pathways, and we say what works together fires together. So that builds the stronger connections between our neural pathways. It's easiest for us to recall and recollect memories when our neural pathways become stronger, and if our neural pathways are weaker, we start to forget things. So sorting and consolidation of working memory into long-term memory are performed largely by the hippocampus through a process called encoding, and the hippocampus also helps long-term memory consolidation during sleep. Long-term memory has distinct 2 types. So the explicit memory, which is our procedural memory. So we use this like when we are like riding a bike or speaking or something like that. And then we have our emotional memory, which is really important in the learning process, where we associate our learning with our emotions. And then we have our explicit memory, which is our declarative memory, which can be consistently recalled. So facts or experiences or events. We have our episodic memory. So this is a personal experience. So recalling like sight, sound, space. And then we have our somatic memory, which is facts that you can retrieve. So names of people, cities, cars, I would say like IV pump manufacturer names or wound dressings and things like that. So how do we then support flourishing in education? So as nurse educators, we need to support the learning experience through wellbeing, engagement and purpose in learning. Our key elements to support nurses to flourish with their professional development is to foster an environment that's inclusive, supportive, builds those positive working relationships and encouraging learning that's meaningful. And I guess ways we can do this as nurse educators to enhance the memory and lifelong learning of our nurses is allowing nurses time to process information. We can repeat and we can scaffold the learning ideas. So we can do our skill-based learning stations and then build upon those and space those out, whether it's a week apart or a few days apart. We can ask them to think about connecting the new information that we're teaching them to prior knowledge. We can also use imagery or we can use patient case scenarios to help aid their retention. So retention also depends on repetition, like we've talked about, rehearsal and practice. So getting them to practice, practice, practice. So effectively, we need to be mindful about how much information we teach people. So not giving them all the information at once or helping them to recall information, then building upon and scaffolding about what that is, and then highlighting what the most important parts are. So then the recency efforts, so primacy of learning. So students tend to remember information presented at the beginning and the end of the lesson. So make sure that we're chunking all the important stuff at the beginning when we're teaching them. Ensuring that we're consolidating and helping them get good sleep. So think about when our emotions are processed, our amygdala can be either hijacked, so it can enhance or block learning depending on people's emotional state or how much sleep they've had. If we have a positive engagement in the clinical space, but also when we're teaching our new grads, we can help them feel safe and motivated, and that will help improve their retention. And as we said, like timing matters. So give them the most important information right at the beginning. So the first 10 to 20 minutes, people are more likely to retain more information. And I think make it novel, make it fun. That will help increase engagement. We talked about learning emotional memory. So that's where it's crucial for helping emotions to centrally store information. So negative emotions can stop and impede learning. That's because we just don't have enough capacity to pay attention, whereas positive emotions really enhance the attention and help us encode and retrieve, and we're more likely to respond with positive emotions. So again, sleep, promoting sleep. We want to make sure we get our nurses get enough sleep. So sleep helps the metabolic process. We've got that neuroplasticity that helps. It increases attention and focus. And we just want to really create those brain-friendly learning environments. So not making sure that people are tired when they come on shift. We can educate and give them the sleep hygiene. Again, mindfulness. So using mindfulness in our education techniques. There's lots and lots of mindfulness out there. We just need to ensure that people have got capacity for awareness. Thinking is powerful, but it's equally powerful if people are aware and they've got their full attention. And I think mindfulness is about being present in the present mind and coming with a non-judgmental approach. So cognitive flexibility in education helps promote curiosity and adaptability and resilience in nursing education. As nurse educators, we can foster that by reflective practice and facilitating learning discussions with case studies, open-ended questions through simulations. And finally, flourishing in our environment. So helping people learn and grow and being present in the moment and open with our conversations. So thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you found that valuable. Thanks. Bye.